The Battle of Dakar was the fiery introduction to an admittedly controversial Star Wars film, and I'd like to take a step back from the hatred surrounding The Last Jedi and examine this battle on its own to see how it holds up nearly 5 years later. I'm Zach from the Five Nights Tavern, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Battle of Dakar. Let's get started. Right off the bat, I'd like to give some praise to the film for an excellent setup to the battle. The Resistance, hot off the heels of destroying Starkiller Base, are rushing to evacuate before the First Order finds out where they are and destroys them. But as the evacuation is progressing, the First Order arrives, forcing the Resistance to try and buy time for the evacuation to complete. This setup reminds me of the desperate Battle of Hoth, where the rebels were forced to commit to a battle that they could not win just to buy time, and I really like that personally. The situation for the Resistance is put into more dire straits as a massive Mandator IV Dreadnought arrives with an autocannon system powerful enough to have annihilated the entire Resistance had they not already been evacuating. Poe even goes as far as to call this thing a fleet killer, so it would make sense that the First Order would bring one along to try to snuff out the Resistance in one shot. That feels like a very Empire thing to do if you ask me. This next sequence I find really enjoyable despite its silliness, as it in my mind puts the incompetence of the Empire and by proxy the First Order on full display. Here we have one lone X-Wing, manned by the current and probably all-time best pilot in the galaxy, Poe Dameron. Yeah, I said it, fight me. Squaring off against the Mandator IV with one mission: destroy the Dreadnought's defense cannons to allow for a bombing run. Now on paper, this entire thing should just be silly. One fighter shouldn't really have a chance to pull this off no matter who's piloting it. But if we look back through Star Wars, Imperial ships have always struggled against starfighters, and they never really seem to learn that lesson. Couple that with the fact that neither the Empire nor the First Order ever had the forethought to launch their own fighters beforehand, and you've basically handed Poe the win on a silver platter. Now, despite all of this ass-kicking that Poe is currently doing, we need to remember that this wasn't supposed to be a full-on battle. He was sent out there by Leia to distract the First Order and to buy time for the evacuation, which at this point had just finished, and Leia, not wanting to suffer any unnecessary casualties to her already small force, orders Poe and his forces to pull back so that they can all retreat. But rather than listening, he argues that the Dreadnought is a fleet killer and has to be destroyed no matter what. And with this, Poe disobeys orders and the battle is on. Now, I'm going to go a bit more in-depth with this disagreement later on, as I want to touch on the aftermath of the battle before arguing who had the better logic here. But for now, I'm ready to move on and discuss the Resistance's flawed tactics, as they seem rather out of place when compared to the rest of Star Wars. In the past, the Rebellion was always quite cunning with how they handled starfighter battles, opting for quick hit-and-run tactics with their superior fighters to cause as much damage as possible before retreating to avoid losses. But it seems that the Resistance had lost the Rebellion playbook at some point, despite having several prominent leaders still around like Leia and Admiral Akbar, as they proceed to completely screw up their attack and lose way more ships than necessary. The Resistance squadron is composed of X-Wings, A-Wings, and some of these new MG-100 Star Fortress bombers which we hadn't seen before. The plan was for the fighters to escort the bombers to the Dreadnought, screening against First Order ties and protecting them as much as possible as they were very slow-moving targets. But the problems start immediately as the fighters opt to hang out with the bombers instead of rushing ahead before the fighting began to intercept the ties and potentially keep the bombers as far away from harm as possible. This opened the bombers up to attack instantly and resulted in one being destroyed within moments of the battle starting. And speaking of these bombers, to put it bluntly, they're just awful. They're big, bulky, slow-moving targets, and in case I forgot to mention, they are full of bombs. You know, those things that like to explode, and for some ungodly reason, these oversized coffins are flying like 20 feet apart from each other, basically begging for disaster. And wouldn't you know it, disaster strikes. One bomber is destroyed, and the debris from that one ship flies off and starts a domino effect, killing all but one of them in one fell swoop. The First Order didn't even have to try here, as the Resistance clearly didn't think that through, and caused even more unneeded losses. Watching all of this, I just have one question. Where are the Y-Wings? Seriously, where are they? I feel like this battle would have gone way better for the Resistance had they ditched these stupid Star Fortress things and just used the tried and true Y-Wing. And sure, the Resistance wins in the end, but at what cost? It seems like most of Poe's squad was wiped out during the battle, and the bombers had a 100% casualty rate, and given how desperate the Resistance must be for manpower and material at this point, I'd say these losses were beyond unacceptable. And it seems that Leia thought so too, as she instantly demotes Poe from commander to captain and grounds him from any missions because of his reckless actions. This leads me back to the disagreement at the onset of the battle. Who was right in this situation, Poe or Leia? Well, given what we know about how the First Order ends up tracking the fleet, I'm tempted to call Poe right for his foresight into needing to destroy the Dreadnought before it got a chance to take out the fleet, but given how he couldn't possibly have known they would be followed, I'd say in the moment, Leia was right. The Resistance couldn't afford any major losses, especially at that moment. The entire bomber fleet was decimated, and a number of irreplaceable pilots and fighters were lost as well to take out just one First Order ship. A powerful ship, sure, but still, just one. Leia saw the bigger picture while Poe couldn't see past the perspective of his cockpit, and honestly, despite all the hate that The Last Jedi gets even today, I really appreciate this situation. It adds some depth to our heroes in an interesting way and presents the up until this point flat character of Poe with some flaws that he must work to overcome if he is eventually to lead the Resistance. Overall, despite its flaws, I really enjoyed the Battle of Dakar. But what did you think? Was Leia or Poe right, and what would you have done if you were in charge in this situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments down below. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and I really can't thank all of you enough for the incredible support we've been getting. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and as always, cheers.